Thank you, folks. Thank you for being a part of this, and it gives me a great honor to introduce, once again, the directors of the film, Tim Roper and Marc Bennett. Tim and Marc, please join us. We also have Lisa Effress here. She is the producer of the film, and Melinda Goldrich, an executive producer of the film. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the film, how important it is not just to remember, but really the lessons that we learn and how that impacts our world today. You've just impacted this audience with this film. I'm starting usually with a question that I build up to, but I want to dive right in. What are your hopes that this film will do to this audience? What are your hopes that this audience will do now?
Well, thank you for staying. Really, we very much appreciate that because there is a lot to talk about. My hope has always been this film would start a conversation. That conversation being, what is it about us? And when I say us, from the rest of this conversation, I mean all humanity. I'm not talking about any ethnicity or nationality or race or religion. When it comes to us, what is it about our species that allows us to do these things to one another? And what is it that can help us to stop? And how can we, I think one of the things, my big goals is, now that you know dehumanization, I know it's used by a lot of historians and journalists, but not a lot of people use it. Now that you know the textbook definition of genocide, and you know the textbook definition of dehumanization, when you see it, when you hear it, recognize it, acknowledge it, call it out, and when you feel it going on in yourself, fight back against that, because we're all capable of the dark things that you've seen in this film. None of us are immune. So I think planting that seed in each and everyone's mind and reminding ourselves of that, ruminating on that, I think is very important to stopping these kind of horrors.
I would just add too, I think it's really important to support public education. I think that's a real big issue, and that would be my hope, one of my many hopes for all of you.
And just, I think, reiterating what Tim said, starting the conversation, creating awareness, because as David Livingston Smith says in the film, if we have any chance of making the future less hideous than the past, excuse me,
You're in trouble.
that it comes through awareness and education and knowing what's happened before us as, you know, we venture into uncharted waters, especially now in our world where things are, we see examples of everything we talk about in the film happening right in front of our eyes. And I think it's important to remember that it didn't start with the gas chambers. It started with the concept of us versus them, of dehumanizing language, of hate speech and everything. And I think that we really need to be cognizant of all that and really, really, really pay attention to what's going on in our world. And that's why I think we were so drawn to make this film about this ride, which represents not only the Holocaust, but such bigger universal topics about what we're capable of. And I think it's really important for us to pay attention now.
Thank you. Melinda?
I started off funding the film to tell the story of the ride and to support and promote the ride for the JCC in Krakow. That ride is annually. It's coming up at the end of June, and it's open to all ages, all people all over. And those of you who haven't been on it should consider it after seeing the film. But when the film expanded to a much broader subject matter, which you saw tonight, then it became more than that. It became a film that I think is important for people to see as a means of education, and not just Jewish groups at Jewish festivals or Jewish groups at the Jewish Community Center like we are tonight, but people all over, people from all different faiths, people from all different backgrounds. And my hope for the film is that it gets seen and that it's shared among a diversity of populations.
So now I'm going to thank you all. I'm now going to step back a little bit and tell me a little bit about how this all started, because it really does sound like you had one film that expanded into a much larger topic, and I'd love to know where this started and how you all got involved.
Well, when Melinda approached us with this idea of filming this ride for the living, seemed like such a unique concept of a bike ride from Auschwitz to JCC in Krakow. Never heard of anything like that. And we kind of thought, what an interesting way to get into a conversation about the Holocaust through this unique, inspirational ride. So we started to work on this, and kind of as we got into it and researched it and learned about Marcel and Robert and the resurgence of Krakow and Schindler's List being filmed in the Jewish Quarter, the story started to expand organically. And then the idea, and Tim being a real history buff was such a benefit to that, the idea of like really showing the Holocaust not as this isolated incident as some of the scholars talk about, but showing it in the context of history and the flow of history. And it's that way, by doing that we could truly learn from all these other events that have such similarities. And so the story kept evolving, and then into the reasons that caused genocide, the whole thing about dehumanization versus empathy, and then the current events that started happening during the ride. So it became kind of organically a much bigger conversation of a much bigger universal topic. But I think it makes all the genocides more important and relevant when you look at them together, as opposed to, as Timothy Snyder says, behind plexiglass or as isolated incidents.
I mean, I don't have a ton to add to that. That is exactly kind of how things unfolded. But I do remember when we first heard from Melinda and she had reached out to Mark and then Mark reached out to me. This was supposed to be a 20, maybe 30-minute video about the ride. And for me personally, growing up Jewish and studying the Holocaust, it wasn't until we went to Auschwitz for the first time, Mark and I went to Location Scout and shoot some B-roll. And it was then that it really hit me that I felt that this needed to be about so much more than just the ride. Not that the ride is not so important, but we got there before sunrise. We set up our cameras, and the sun started shining, and there was dew on the trees. It was like late May, and the flowers were blooming, and it was just beautiful. And it was such a stark contrast to me of just kind of recognizing the horrors that had happened there, and then like this beauty. And that's when I really started to kind of rethink how we could turn this into a little bit more than about just the ride.
So Melinda, you were talking about how to get this to other audiences. Obviously, we have a little bit of a built-in audience here on so many levels, but and I'm sure there's some bike ride fans here too. We get that. We're in New York. But how are you getting this out to audiences? How can we help?
Go ahead. Well, we're in the festival circuit right now. I think we've shown in 15, 18 festivals around North America, a little bit in Europe as well, which is a great process for venue. It's competitive, and a lot of people go there to promote film. I personally love audiences like this and university audiences. We have true curiosity versus, is this thing going to win an award, which is always nice as well. But as you go through the festival circuit, the tradition is distributors come as audience members, and they have the ideas of acquiring new properties, and they ruminate about whether or not it's worthy of the widest possible audience and whether it can be profitable, frankly. So that's a bit of an organic process. It's getting more challenging now than it used to be a few years ago for documentaries. There are so many of them, and so we're hoping to rise above the din to some degree. And I think the topicality of our film helps a lot. It's both overt, I think, and subtextual. We get numerous comments in forums like this all the time. It's like, oh my God, this film's about right now. And we're like, yeah. But you don't know that necessarily from the poster. You get some sense of it from the trailer. But I thrive on the surprise and sort of the epiphanous nature of the way people kind of had their minds opened by this film.
As they mentioned, it went through like a festival circuit, and then we have special screenings like this one and in other communities where people ask. And there's kind of an unlimited number of communities where we could do individual screenings like this. Ideally, it will get picked up by an organization that can do a higher level distribution. It is better to watch it with an audience, but of course it could be easily streamed, and that may be the long-term use. We don't really know. It also has sort of the potential to be, like through the Shoah Foundation, broke into modules for education modules, although some of it might be too graphic for younger people, like young kids. So there's a long-term use of maybe using sections of it as education. And then we also are going to sort of break out the ride portion of it for a promotional tool for the JCC in Krakow. So now that we have the whole movie, there's a lot that can be done with the content, but the future of it remains to be seen.
I'm going to ask the controversial question now, and we live in really tricky times. I don't know how any better way to put it. Of like the things are so complicated out there, and having a film that's asking to have a conversation, to start a conversation, is something that's considered controversial in these days. Have you gotten any pushback? Are you reaching beyond the choir?
We have random, maybe not random, maybe sometimes preordained pushback. Here's one thing that's important to consider is when you look at a film like this, and I know this happens in a lot of the more political type, just turn that guy off. There are documentaries that stray very deliberately into political territory, but it's important to remember we're not doing the genocide hit parade, and we're not going back in history and picking the good guys and the bad guys. To me, the really important takeaway here is that the things you've seen here can be done by any of us of any race, nationality, origin, religion. So there is no such thing as, well, it's all white Europeans, or it's all Germans, or it's all certain African tribes, or, that's just how those people are. No, the minute you hear someone say those people, when it comes to either victims or perpetrators, you're into really ugly, dirty, dangerous territory. So there's always going to be somebody that says, why didn't you include this? I've had two people tell me, those Africans, they enslaved each other. And, those natives, they fought each other. Well, yeah, they did. Because why? They're human beings. They're not immune from violence or dehumanization any more than anyone in this room is. So, again, we're not picking the good guys and the bad guys, making heroes and villains throughout history. We're saying humanity is accountable for all the impulses that you saw demonstrated in the film.
Thank you. I'd love to take the opportunity to open it to questions from the audience, and I already see some hands up. We're going to pass the microphone around, and we can start down here.
Thank you. Anger in mankind is without doubt. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is not focusing on innate human anger, which is, as I said, universal. Reminds me of an experience my wife and I had when we were at Auschwitz touring. The guide was a tall, handsome German with perfect English, and he gave a perfect presentation. And at the end, I asked him a modest question. I said, is there a holiday when you close Auschwitz so no one can visit? And he said, yes. So we'd all have to guess what the holiday was. But the holiday was Christmas. It could have been Rosh Hashanah or 100 other holidays, but I thought that was a great lesson to us about what's going on in mankind. Thank you.
Thank you. I just comment on the phenomenon of anger and hate. It's a human emotion. You know, I see, protest signs that say eradicate hate or, fight hate. You can try, but as David Livingston Smith said, dehumanization is not even about hate. It's about the utter disregard of certain groups, wanting them to disappear. Sometimes it's just they concoct disgust or fear or rage in order to make someone or some group go away. But, there's always going to be hate. There's always going to be good people and bad people. But when you cross the threshold into really deadly stuff, we discovered dehumanization is often the key for these mass atrocities. Because the minute you start to regard someone as not one of us, and that means human, and sometimes you don't even know what it is. Sometimes it's rats, vermins, cockroaches, monkeys, natural born criminals, all these kinds of things. But sometimes, they have no soul. Or there's something about them. I can't put my finger on it, but they're just can't put my finger on. They're not us. And that's worse than hate, in my opinion, because it's deadlier.
We have a question up here.
Thank you. Hi. So I loved how you almost forced empathy upon the audience, where it says you are so-and-so living through XYZ, and you experienced all these various, moments in life based on the genocide that was being represented. I'm curious, when you were choosing these stories, were they based on primary sources that you found, or were they a combination of various sources, and how did you choose which ones to focus on versus others?
Most of them were composite. Speaking of USC Shoah, they opened their testimony library to us, which has scores and scores of video taped testimony from all manner of genocides. And I think I found inspiration on the Armenian genocide, Cambodian genocide from there. No, Rwanda, I actually spoke to a survivor on the phone. And same with Darfur, which we ended up not being able to complete. But then you take those stories and then you begin to employ things that from historical fact occurred. Like in Rwanda, for instance, Nyamata, the church there was a very, very notorious massacre within the church that took place. And the survivor I spoke to, he was that little boy that had to crawl out under his father's broken back. So we would take individual testimonies. And by the way, testimony is the gold standard in Holocaust education and most genocide education because it does conjure the most empathy. Testimony takes time, though. And we had to compress 4 centuries of African experience on this continent into 4 minutes. And you can't rush somebody through their testimony. So we opted for narration, and we opted for the most empathetic way below sheer testimony. So to answer your question, it's a composite and some very direct lifts.
And it's also, just like to say, that's a great question also because one of the goals with the film was to put the viewers, in the seats of the writers, in the experience of those genocides. And that's why using talking about Imagine You, we tried to get people to watch this and empathize with the characters in the film. So that's a great question. Thank you.
One of the things about having Bernard and Marcel at the Ride for the Living every year, which of course, hopefully they'll be able to come for many more years, but realistically not that many more years, is they do bring that to the ride, that this is where I was as a child, this is where I survived and the rest of my family did not. And it's been a very special experience for those of you who've been on the ride and met them. And, being able to have them there it's a limited commodity, and we have it on film now, but that can't be replicated. That special relationship cannot be replicated.
And as we were so fortunate, as you saw in the film, to have so many esteemed scholars and experts in the field of the Holocaust, of genocide, and Michael Berenbaum, who is just extraordinary, He was a scholar, a rabbi, a professor, one of the founding members of the Holocaust Museum in Washington. As he so eloquently put it, that we're 1 minute till midnight in the life of survivors. So having them on the ride and interact with them is quite extraordinary. Or because of Melinda's support for the Auschwitz Museum, we were given unprecedented access to film in Auschwitz, as you saw when we were there, as Lisa mentioned, before sunrise, when the camp was closed, and then with the first film crew ever to be able to film the guide showing the tour of Auschwitz.
That's some good producing right there.
Yeah, and to have Bernard there that day was extraordinary. And even though we were so focused on filming and getting the shots and telling the story when we were there, and had to kind of put our emotions to the sides a little bit and be filmmakers first, and caring, empathetic human beings kind of second. But it's still the resonance of being there, around Marcella or Bernard, is quite extraordinary. And I think we're so fortunate to be able to have them in the film to contribute to the narrative and share that experience firsthand.
If I could just add too, so we were there in 2019 filming, and then we were all back there again in 2023, and this time we went as participants, so we all rode in the ride in 2023. Tim and I are married, for those of you who don't know, and we brought our then 12-year-old daughter with us. It was really important to us to have her come on the ride with us. She did the ride. She met Bernard. She met Marcel. She watched the film for the first time with Bernard and Marcel in the theater, and it was her mitzvah project because her bat mitzvah was the following May. So it just, I don't know, it was very meaningful to go there as a filmmaker once and then go back as a participant. I know we have Richard in the audience, who was in the ride in 2019. He was in our film. I don't know if there's any other riders, but it's quite a remarkable, meaningful experience.
There's a lot of people still have questions. Good.
I had no idea what I was going to see tonight, and I've seen many films and documentaries and fiction, nonfiction about the Holocaust, but not addressing different aspects of genocide. Several years ago, I was with Joschka Fischer, the former foreign minister of Germany, and we calculated that basically every 10 years there's a genocide happening in the world. So regarding distribution and getting this out, have you reached out to members of the Armenian diaspora? Have you spoken with the ambassador of Rwanda? And have you considered going to the Massapequa Indians who have Mohegan Sun, because they were financed by Saul Kirshner, as presenting this? You allude to very well about the Indians, and it's probably the only film I've seen in I don't know how long that really addresses the Armenian community. And I don't like ideas, I like tachlis, as they say in Gaelic. If you reach out to President Sarkisian, the former president of Armenia, he would probably be a wonderful participant or ally, at least in the Armenian diaspora, and find other people to align with. Films doing the whole circuit, I know a little bit about it, but as you said, there are so many out there. But by aligning with certain people, that's where you're going to have the most impact.
That's a great idea. We'll take any help we can get in that regard, because the outreach is kind of limited to us and one or two other people you're not seeing here in our apparatus. So great idea. I'd love to talk more about that.
We'll take a question.
We'll take right down here.
Thank you. I totally agree with that last speaker. When you introduced the film and you said this is not just a typical Holocaust story, I really thought I was going to be watching the ride where somebody was going through the different camps and maybe some survivors talking about it. This was so much more. the whole concept of empathy, compassion, and the dehumanization is so powerful. I don't even think it should be just distributed to the countries that you represented, but it's something that really is what's the name, the guy who's the science genius, the professor? Yeah, I mean, his concept of bringing it to education is really important. So I think that, I don't know what your byline, your tagline is for the title of this movie, but I think you need to change it. It shouldn't be like it shouldn't be just about, that's like an example of how you're getting there, but that's not the crux of this movie. But I have a question also. This is probably,
We have a question. This is amazing.
Yes. That was
Hey, no, let her keep going, please.
yeah, see, when I'm being nice, they'll let me keep doing just to hear myself talk. No. The question is, why didn't you have no sense of chronology? Is that deliberate? I mean, from all the other genocides. There's no, 1500, 1900, 1400, you know. Is that deliberate?
No, it wasn't. The chronology I thought was less important than context. In other words, there are trigger language and incidents within the film that send you on that circular timeline. The circular timeline, of course, is a wheel, and it's symbolizing the ride, but it's also a George R.R. Martin quote with time is a wheel, for the nature of man is forever unchanging. But for instance, Richard spoke of hell on earth, and there was a very common expression referring to the Cambodian killing fields. So immediately we've got connective tissue between the Holocaust and 1975 Cambodia. So I thought it was more important to make the context connected and the realities connected. For instance, Manifest Destiny and Lebensraum. Very few people know that those are basically the same concept. And we hear things today that sound very Lebensraum-like in our politics. I see a lot of heads nodding. Good. So that's the idea. The idea is a cohesive weave, but not necessarily about marching through time from beginning to end.
And it was a tremendous learning experience for all of us, especially myself, who didn't know much about these genocides in the kind of depth that we went into. But Tim's talking about the connective tissue was more important in the narrative of the film. For instance, that Hitler marveled at the way what we did to the American Indians, Native Indigenous people, and the systems of reservations and all of that. So that kind of connection was what we were hoping to do to help the narrative along with the film.
He's been waiting.
We're going to take one more. And we'll take two more. One up here and then one down there. You got it.
Thank you. Building on what the last two questions were, I'm always struck by a sense that there are many people in the Jewish community, particularly among Holocaust survivors, that feel that the Holocaust was unique, was the only serious, the only thing we can talk about, and that when other groups try to connect the Holocaust with other genocide, with other examples of genocide, well, no, they're not the same thing. And I think you make an incredible point about the way in which those are connected, about the way in which the Holocaust is sort of the uber genocide, if you will, but in fact, they're all part of the same continuum. And I wondered if you got any pushback for that, how you sort of came to the decision to put those two things together and not set the Holocaust apart from all of these other examples.
Interesting that you asked. We fully expected it, and it has not occurred as of yet. But here's the reason. Here's the subtextual, symbolic reason. If we want everyone to be thought of as a human being, then we're connected in the good parts and the bad parts. We're all capable of the really, really dark stuff and the really light stuff too. We're not just some of us more victim-y than others. I mean, Jonathan Greenblatt's correct that anti-Semitism is the world's oldest hatred, but it's not in isolation. And that phenomenon, it's so fascinating to see the patterns of human nature. And to me, this film is a film about human nature. It's not just about history, and it's not just about, relationships. It's really about why we do this stuff and why we allow it to happen. And speaking of taglines, we have a thing in our director's statement that says, we put so much time, energy, and resources into memorializing the dead. When are we going to get busy rehumanizing the living? And the other is, when are we finally going to say never again and truly mean it? Because it's becoming like a bumper sticker now. No offense to anyone that uses that phraseology, but, you know, we can only say it so many times before the language begins to have some teeth. And I think Michael Berenbaum's final line there about shouting at the world to change the world and shouting at the world to make sure the world doesn't change you. I've watched this film probably 1,800 times, and I still get a little misty around there because I feel like I have to scream at the world because the world right now is trying to turn me into something I don't want to be.
Send it to Congress.
Pardon?
Send the film to Congress.
Okay.
I wanted to
I'm with
make
you.
a comment on that, on what she said. I am the daughter of a survivor. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He's no longer alive. I was raised in a household where the Holocaust stood apart from anything and all other things. And my father would not have approved of the commingling of the Holocaust with any other genocide. I'm also on the board of the USC Shoah Foundation, have been for the last 10 years, and have learned a lot from that relationship, that the commonalities of the different situations are greater than the differences at their core, but that the Holocaust does stand alone in the scale of it, the number of countries that were involved. Most of the other situations are within one country, within one people, within one geography. And I had to adjust my thinking to understand that, and that came from a combination of being involved with the USC Shoah Foundation, and they're taking testimonies from other populations, and also from my work with Tim and Mark, and they're convincing me that they would find a way to not minimize the Holocaust by including the other genocides. So it was a big transition for me as well.
And you did it well.
Hi, thank you. First, thank you very much, all of you, for making this movie. It was so good on so many different levels. I never would have thought of mingling all those different genocides that you talked about with the Holocaust. Number two, how does one get involved to do this ride?
So the Ride for the Living has its own website called Ride for the Living. And based .org, right? But even if you just put Ride for the Living, it'll come up and it'll have 2025, and it has a way to just sign up. It tells you all about the schedule. It tells you how to participate. There's also contact information. Jonathan Ornstein, who runs the JCC Krakow, is an American who has lived in Poland for now more than 18 years. And his staff all speaks English. They all are happy to engage with you and share the information. And if not for this year, which is at the end of June, which is about 2 months away, there's always next year. And they do intend to keep it going into the future. So it's open to, like I said, anyone and everyone, all ages, as you saw, really little kids, and then the oldest participants being the 2 survivors.
So block out some time in the end of June, any year you
It's
want.
always the same week. So.
And
I
it
will say-
coincides with the Jewish Heritage Festival that's annual in Krakow. So it's like the ride is not part of the festival, but at the same time. So there's so much going on in the city during that time. It's really a wonderful time to be there.
And could people find out more about the film and follow the film itself?
ForTheLivingMovie.com. There's a wealth of information there about, well, us. No, but really about intent and objectives, and
The screenings.
and future screenings and past screenings, and there's a lot of great critical reviews there as well. We're
A lot of laurels.
a lot of laurels and a lot of good reviews, and a lot of interviews, taped interviews as well. So ForTheLivingMovie.com, and we're on social media too. I think if you do For the Living, you'll find us on Instagram and Blue Sky and Facebook as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Folks, thank you. Please join us for more, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good night. Get home safe.